By 1944, all the clubs in Elmore had joined together in one organization in order to accomplish various things that people had in mind. They gave different concerts. I can remember Peg Ridenauer and Elaine Jagger played Rhapsody in Blue in a duet at one of them, and Paul Ridenauer's mother gave her readings, and there were various things that they did to raise money, and they decided that Elmore should have a library. So we solicited the town for any books that people would give us, and they were all stacked in my dining room. That was during the war, so I was here alone with the kids, and it was okay. And some afternoons and evenings, Gertrude Haar, Helen Wendt, Kate Slates, Mirth Robinson, Jen Rader, and Betty Gearing, those are the ones that I can remember, used to come down and type and catalog the books ready for a library. And Mr. Troutman gave us one wall of the lobby of the locker, and we had shelves built, and that was the first library. And I don't remember just when we moved from there to the back of where Kent Wise is, and then they built the new library building. And since that, there's been an addition, and there's been a wall mural, and it's quite an outstanding library at this time. But in 1945, I told them, you got to get the books out of here. My husband's coming home from the service and can't have the books in here. So we cleared out, moved into the locker. Probably when I was 8 or 10 years old, where Shadell's Arboretum is now, a German family lived there. There was Matilda Stifler and Anna Valletta von Boldy, and Matilda had a son, Fred, who was about my age, and he had a pony. So in the wintertime, he would pull us on our sleds behind where the pony would pull us, and that was always a lot of fun. And of course, in the wintertime, it gets dark early, and my father never got home from his office until after 5 o'clock, so 6 o'clock was dinner hour at our house. And this one evening, I wasn't home at 6 o'clock, and nobody seemed to be concerned, so finally my mother said, well, somebody's probably picked her up by now, and she's gone. And she said with that, both the boys dashed out of the house and looked for me. And of course we were having fun behind the pony, pulling us all over town on our sleds. But that was the only time that I ever did that. After that, I was always home by dark. After my graduation from St. Vincent's Hospital in Toledo, my brother Ken was driving ambulance for the city hospital in Detroit. And after I worked 3 to 11, and after hours, there used to be a bunch of us, the interns, and Ken and whatever nurses got off at 11, and we'd go around the corner to a bar, and we didn't do as much drinking as we did dancing. And then there was one of the residents, Dr. Sachs, they used to call him Gunny Sachs, and he was from the East Coast. And whenever we had an afternoon off, and if he had the afternoon off, why, he'd ask you to go downtown to the show. And you had to take the streetcar from the corner by the hospital and go on, and I think it was the Fox Theater, and they had live stage shows along with the movie. And the afternoon that I went, we walked in, and Clyde McCoy's band was there and playing Sugar Blues. And of course that made my day because I really liked that band. And he was one of the bands of the big band era with Guy Lombardo and the Dorseys and all the rest of them that played at that time. And the Paramount in Toledo used to have live stage shows too. And that's the only place I know in Toledo that had them. Judy thinks she's interested in the night shifts at St. Vincent's when I was in training. And you work 12-hour duty then, 7 at night and there till 7 in the morning. And the most interesting one that I was on first floor wing. And at night, when it's all quiet and no one stirring and most people are asleep, you learn to recognize the footsteps, and you know whether it's one of the doctors coming or whether it's the orderly or whether it's the night supervisor. And there was one resident that was so nice, Dr. Thad Taylor, and he was a big guy, but he was just, we always called him the big teddy bear. And he'd usually go around and visit all the chart rooms that the gals were in at night and give you a back rub or something or that. He was just a real nice guy. And he was related to Mrs. Sadler here in Elmore that lived across the street, that side street from Olive Schaefer. And then Johnny Hillebrand, who later was an OB resident and came back to be in business with Dr. Marty Detelm, he was always pulling something or other. And one night he happened to find one of the nuns' habits hanging in one of the chart rooms, and he came around visiting everybody with that on, and it was hilarious. And I guess he always knew where Mrs. Forrester was. She was a night supervisor, and he must have known where she was to get away with it. And then we had, first floor wing was a men's ward, and we had one man that was in and out with DTs. And when he'd be in, I don't know how he got out, whether he went out the back, the end door, or I thought, but anyway, he'd get out and then he'd come to the chart room where we had the window open and holler in at us and scare us half to death. And then we'd have to get him back in. And then I can't remember the name of the fellow, the guy that was the baker, but when we went down, the cafeteria was in the basement. And it smelled so good because he was baking for the next day. And if you were real nice to him, why, he'd give you some of it. And that was always a treat, too. And in later years, the gal that was waitress in the intern's dining room square danced with us, Betty Paffrath. And I knew I'd seen her from someplace, and she thought she knew me too, so we finally connected that it was at the hospital. Of course, that was a long time before. Mel's father was a Mormon, and the Mormons have in their religion that when the young men are a certain age and they're supposed to go out, I suppose it's on a mission, I don't know, but anyway, when they used to come in this area, why Mel's mother and father kept them for at least overnight and fed them, and sometimes longer than that. So Mel and a friend of his, I think his name was Zeller, rode their motorcycles to the coast, and they stopped in Salt Lake City, and assuming that the Mormons would take them in for the night, and they overheard the couple say, well, they hoped that they didn't expect to stay there. So the boys left, and when Mel got home and he told his dad, he was very upset about it, and they never kept any of the Mormon boys after that. Judy remembers going to Grandma Owen's on Christmas Eve, and at that time, usually the whole family gathered at Grandma's on Christmas Eve, the grandkids and that, and Grandma had an envelope with $2 in it for each one of the grandchildren. But if they didn't come that night, they didn't get it. They didn't get it at a later date. You had to be there or you didn't get it. And when you think of all the grandchildren there were, and at the times that it was, that was probably a lot of money for her to dole out for the kids. And I think the first time I went over there, after Dad wrote to me when he was in service, that Grandma and Vera were just finishing up canning tomatoes. And of course, I don't know that I wanted to make an impression or I was just being helpful, but anyway, I washed dishes and I swore they used every dish they had in the house and every pan. And I washed and washed and washed. And
were the tomatoes any good? Did you get any of the tomatoes?
No, don't think I got a quart of tomatoes even out of it.
What I remember about Christmas Eve at Grandma Owen's is we chased each other around the dining room table. Mm-hmm. It was fun.
Catherine's, all of you would have been about the same age. Ada's, Herbert, and Harold, and George's girls, and Jim, and Kurt's, Dwayne, and Raymond. You all would have been about the same. Within a year or two, you'd have been of the same age. When I would take the children and go over there, before Mel and I were married, Grandma would always give the kids bread and butter or some other, and Judy liked her butter. Well, it wasn't butter. We used butter at home, but Grandma used oleo, and I don't think we ever used oleo for years. And then after the war, the butter had been stored, and because it was rationed and it was stored and it tasted terrible, so then we started using oleo, and I still use oleo. You want to know about the Elmore doctors? Well, when we still lived at Grandma's, and that was before I was 4 years old, and I think I was about, I was born in 15 and the flu epidemic was 18, so it was Dr. Drumgold that we had, and he had a little office between the brick house that Lori Dolph lived in and the downtown building, and that was all torn down to make a parking lot some years ago. And the other doctor in town was Dr. Rolla Willett, and that's where Annette and Lauren Troutman live, on the corner there of Clinton and Augusta Street. And we never had Dr. Willett. And then his son, Gaylord, had an office over to the left on 105, and then just on the right-hand side. And Margaret Willett always had the Girl Scouts, and their daughter was Judy's age, and the boy was older. And Gaylord Jr. is the one that always had the fireworks. His father had it for years, and then he continued it until that explosion some years ago, and he hasn't been well since. And when Dr. Drumgold ceased to practice, Dr. Sloan came to town. He was from Canada, and we went to Dr. Sloan then for years. And after he was out of practice, and we went to Dr. Russell over in Genoa, and Dr. Votaw came to Elmore, and but we didn't go to him either. And then Elmore Medical Associates, Dr. Ridenour, opened an office above the post office downtown, and everybody said that that we didn't need another doctor in town. Well, just after the year that he started, then both Gaylord Willett and Votaw left their practice, so he was left the only doctor in town. And a year later, Dr. Kiefer came in with him, and he started in 56, and Dr. Kiefer came in 57, and in 61 we moved from upstairs downtown out to the present building where they are, and then Dr. Nara came with them, and later Dr. Rye, and Dr. Ridenour retired and later had Alzheimer's and died, and Dr. Kiefer is retired and not all that well. He's had a lot of heart problems, and but this is 2009, and Dr. Nara was 67 on the 2nd of February, so I suppose it won't be too many years till he'll be retiring, but his son Ravi is in with him, and Dr. Rai. I just happen to think that when I was a kid and Dr. Drumgold used to come, of course they made house calls then, and if he came for somebody else in the family, well, he'd always give the kids little pink pills. I suppose they were sugar pills or something, but anyway, we all got a pill too.